On a quiet afternoon in March 2023, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of mint tea and saw my husband's urn for sale on eBay. The listing said vintage brass urn, contents unknown. The price was $49. The seller was local. The initials carved into the base were CJR, the same shallow letters I'd watched the jeweler cut 8 months earlier, right after the funeral. I took a screenshot. I set my phone face down on the table. Then I walked to the spare room where the urn had been sitting on a shelf. My daughter-in-law insisted we clear for healing. The shelf was empty. I came back to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a fresh yellow pad. At the top, I wrote, March House. That was the moment everything changed. Because grief had made me practical. I kept lists. The freezer had labeled meals sorted by week. I paid bills on Sundays with a pencil and a ruler like I was balancing a lab report. For 31 years, I had been married to a man who loved order, Carl James Richter, a civil engineer who checked the front door twice before bed, not out of fear but out of respect for structure. When he died that summer, I didn't fall apart. I organized. I scheduled it. I froze casseroles and updated the insurance and kept the house running like a system that wouldn't tolerate failure. And for 8 months, that system held. Until that Tuesday afternoon, when I typed brass urn, vintage into the search bar, looking for a frame to display his military photo. Third row down, there it was. A dull brass canister photographed on beige carpet, a hairline scratch visible on the lid right where a moving box had slipped from my hands years ago when we'd first brought it home, empty, as a placeholder. Someday, Carl had joked. But not soon. The listing showed 3 photos. I clicked each one and zoomed. The smallest details were unmistakably mine. The felt pad I'd glued crooked to the base to protect the mantle. The faint ring from the time Carl set it on a damp coaster, laughing, saying, I'm not going anywhere. The seller's city matched mine, Columbus, Ohio, 43220. The listing had been live for 18 hours. I stared at the timestamp and felt something tilt inside me quietly, permanently. I got up from the table. I walked down the short hallway to the spare room. The door was half open. The shelf where the urn had lived for 6 months right there, at eye level, beside a stack of his old engineering journals, was bare. Not even a ring of dust. Just clean pine and the faint smell of lemon furniture polish. I stood in the doorway and breathed once slowly. Then I turned around, went back to the kitchen, and started a new list. The shift, Elaine Richter realized later, had actually started weeks earlier. Her daughter-in-law, Avery, had gotten unusually energetic about the house sometime in late February. Let me help, she kept saying, arriving on Saturday mornings with plastic storage bins and a label maker. It's good to keep things moving. Avery was 41, a part-time salon receptionist who also resold vintage items online, mostly clothes and home decor she picked up at estate sales. She had a friendly, efficient manner and a way of framing everything as self-care. Clearing space helps you heal, she'd say, rearranging throw pillows or suggesting Elaine donate books she hadn't opened in years. At first, Elaine had been grateful. The house felt heavy. Avery's energy was a distraction. But then small things started disappearing. A box of Carl's old cufflinks that Elaine had been meaning to sort. The red toolbox he'd kept by the basement door, still half full of screwdrivers and electrical tape. A glass pitcher Elaine's mother had given her decades ago, depression glass, pale green, with a chipped handle. I listed a few duplicates, Avery said one afternoon, cheerful, holding up her phone to show an eBay page. You'll love seeing the clutter go. Elaine nodded and wrote pitcher in the margin of a grocery list. She didn't ask. She didn't want to seem petty. But she noticed. Then Avery asked for the spare keys. Just for safety, she said. In case something happens and you need help, Elaine handed them over without comment. A week later, the living room had been rearranged, candles in new holders, a cream-colored throw that shed fibers on the couch, photo frames lined up in grids instead of scattered the way Carl used to like them. Avery moved through the house with the ease of someone who felt entitled to redesign it. Elaine watched from the kitchen table, sipping tea, saying nothing. One evening, Elaine's son Michael stopped by after work. He was 34, an HVAC estimator with soft shoulders and a voice that always sounded like he was apologizing. He mentioned, almost casually, that Avery was monetizing the extras to help with their car payment. "She's good at it," he said, opening the fridge and pulling out a beer. "Turns junk into cash." Elaine set down her pen and looked at him. "What extras?" she asked. Michael shrugged. "You know, stuff you're not using." He took a long drink and changed the subject. That night, Elaine went through the house with a notebook. She opened closets and drawers and checked shelves. She found gaps she hadn't registered before. A brass bookend that used to sit on Carl's desk. A set of vintage coasters Elaine had inherited from an aunt. A wooden cigar box Carl had kept loose changed in. She wrote each item down, one line at a time, with the date she'd last seen it. At the bottom of the page, she wrote a single sentence Carl used to say when he was reviewing blueprints for a project: "Things show you how people think." The next morning, Elaine created a second eBay account. She used her maiden name, Elaine Howell, and set up a new email address through a free service. She waited until the house was empty, then sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and searched the eBay seller whose listing she'd found the day before. The username was generic Resale Avenue and the feedback score was low. 18 transactions, all recent, all 5 stars. Elaine clicked through the active listings. There were 7 items for sale. One of them was her mother's green glass pitcher. Elaine opened a message window and typed carefully, "Is the engraving CJR?" Hard to tell from the photo. She hit send and waited. The reply came within 20 minutes. "Yes, hard to read." Came from an estate cleanout. "Don't know what's inside." Elaine read the message twice. Then she typed a follow-up. "Can you send a photo of the base? I need to check sizing." The image arrived within 10 minutes. A close-up shot of the urn's bottom, the shallow initials carved just off-center, exactly as Elaine remembered them. She zoomed in until the screen pixelated. There was no question. This was Carl's urn. She checked the seller's location again. Columbus, 43220. The same zip code as Avery and Michael's apartment. Elaine took screenshots of the listing page, the photo, the message thread, the seller handle, the timestamps. She saved each image into a new folder on her desktop labeled March Documentation, then she clicked the blue button that said Buy It Now. The system asked for a shipping address. Elaine entered the P.O. box she'd kept for years back when she used to volunteer doing tax prep for seniors and didn't want clients mailing documents to the house. She paid through PayPal. The transaction receipt loaded immediately. At the bottom of the email, in small gray text, was the seller's registered name, Avril M. Collins Richter. The last 4 digits listed beside it matched Avery's phone number. Elaine printed the receipt, folded it in half, and tucked it into the new folder. Then she logged off and sat very still. By Friday, the package arrived. Elaine drove to the post office just before closing. The clerk handed her a small cardboard box wrapped in brown packing tape. The return address label had been printed on plain paper and taped over what looked like an old shipping sticker. Elaine could see faint marker lines beneath it, Carl's full name, written in her own handwriting from the day she'd brought the urn home from the funeral parlor. She carried the box to her car, set it on the passenger seat, and drove home without the radio on. Inside the house, she locked the door and took the box to the kitchen table. She used a pair of scissors to cut through the tape. Inside was a thin layer of bubble wrap and the urn, nestled sideways. Elaine lifted it carefully. The brass was cool and dull under the overhead light. The hairline scratch ran along the lid exactly where she remembered. She unscrewed the top. Inside was a sealed plastic bag with a small adhesive label still affixed. Riverside Funeral Services, C. Richter, August 2022. The seal was intact. Elaine sat on the floor and let her breathing slow. Then she stood up, screwed the lid back on, and carried the urn to the hall closet. She set it on the top shelf, behind a stack of winter blankets. She would deal with it later. Back at the kitchen table, Elaine opened her laptop and began organizing her evidence. She created a new folder inside the March documentation file and labeled it Chain of Custody. She saved the eBay listing page again, this time with a date stamp visible in the corner. She saved the message thread between her fake account and Resale Avenue. She saved the transaction receipt with Avery's legal name. She saved the PayPal confirmation, the tracking number, and a photo she'd taken of the package label showing Carl's name beneath the tape. She printed everything and placed each page into a manila envelope. At the top, in blue pen, she wrote, March 2023, Documentation Re, CJR. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to Marion Neely. Marion had been Elaine's estate attorney for nearly 15 years, a composed woman in her late 50s who wore reading glasses on a silver chain and never raised her voice. Elaine had worked with her to draft Carl's will years ago, and again after his death to handle probate. She trusted her completely. Elaine sent a brief email. Need to update my will. Can we meet this week? I'd like to do the signing at home, Marion replied within an hour. Tuesday at 2 works. I'll bring the notary. Over the weekend, Elaine made a list of changes she wanted. She wrote them out by hand on a legal pad, one item at a time, each sentence numbered and precise. First, revoke all prior bequests to Michael and Avery. Second, establish a trust for her grandson, Daniel, with funds to be released at age 18 for education and at 25 for general use. Third, name her niece, Rebecca, as executor and backup guardian. Fourth, create a charitable scholarship fund in Carl's name to be funded from the portion of her estate that would have otherwise gone to Michael. Fifth, include a clause explicitly revoking any bequests to individuals involved in the unauthorized sale or removal of Carl's remains. Sixth, grant the executor full discretion over personal property and memorabilia. Elaine read through the list 3 times, made 2 small edits, and tucked it into the manila envelope. Tuesday afternoon, Marion Neely arrived at the house carrying a leather briefcase and a portable notary kit. She was wearing a gray blazer and low heels. Her assistant, a younger woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a tablet, followed her inside. Elaine had set out water glasses and a plate of shortbread cookies on the kitchen table. The window was open just enough to let in the cool air and the sound of sparrows in the hedges. Marion sat down, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a thin stack of documents clipped together with a silver binder clip. I reviewed your requests, she said. Everything is straightforward. We'll execute today. Elaine nodded. I want Michael and Avery here, she said. For clarity, Marion glanced up. You don't need them present for execution, she said. But if you prefer it, we can arrange that. Elaine folded her hands on the table. I prefer it, she said. Marion made a note on her tablet. I'll call them now, Elaine added. She picked up her phone and sent a group text. Please come by today at 3. Need you here for paperwork. Nothing bad. Bring Daniel if you want, Avery replied immediately with a thumbs-up emoji. Michael sent, okay. At 3 o'clock, Michael and Avery arrived. Michael looked uneasy in the way he always did when asked to be somewhere at a specific time. He wore wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt with a small oil stain near the collar. Avery looked polished, fitted jeans, a white blouse, gold hoop earrings. She carried her phone in one hand and smiled brightly. What's this about? She asked, setting her purse on the counter. Elaine gestured to the table. Just housekeeping, she said. Sit down. Marion Neely introduced herself and her assistant. She explained, in calm and measured sentences, that Elaine was updating her will and wanted the family present for transparency. She described the role of an executor, the structure of a residuary estate, and the function of a trust. Avery nodded along, scrolling briefly on her phone before setting it face down on the table. Michael sat with his hands folded, eyes on the documents. Marion turned to a tab section of the paperwork and read aloud. The trust established for Daniel Richter will be managed independently, with disbursements at ages 18 and 25. The trustee is Rebecca Howell. The trust bypasses parental control entirely, Michael blinked. Avery's smile faltered slightly. Marion continued. A $1 bequest is made to Michael Richter to avoid any ambiguity regarding intent. Personal effects and memorabilia will be distributed at the executor's sole discretion. Then Marion turned to the final page. Her voice didn't change. In light of certain actions involving the disposition of my late husband's remains without my knowledge or consent, I revoke all prior memoranda of personal property and bequests to the parties involved in that disposition. I direct my executor to retain, secure, and preserve the remains, memorial effects, and records related to my husband. I further direct that a charitable scholarship be established in his name, funded by the portion of my estate that would otherwise have passed to those parties. The room was silent. Elaine kept her eyes on the paper in front of her. Marian slid a pen across the table. Initial here, here, and here, she said. Sign at the bottom, Elaine signed. The notary stamped each page with a soft metallic click. Then Elaine reached under the table and pulled out the manila envelope. She set it in front of Avery without a word. Avery stared at it. What's this? She asked. Elaine opened the flap and slid the top sheet halfway out, the eBay listing, printed in color, showing the urn and the initials C.J.R. on the base. Beside it was the PayPal receipt with Avery's legal name circled in red ink. This is for your records, Elaine said. Her voice was even. Avery's face went pale. She whispered, You don't understand. Elaine shook her head. I do, she said. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, he started. Elaine put her hand flat on the table. No arguing, she said. This is done. She looked at Marian, who gathered the signed pages into a folder with slow, deliberate hands. The assistant placed the notary stamp back into its case and zipped it shut. The sound of the zipper was sharp in the quiet room. Avery pushed the envelope back toward the center of the table as if it might leave a mark. She stood up. Michael stayed seated, staring at his hands. Marian closed her briefcase and nodded to Elaine. We'll file these by Friday, she said. You'll get copies by mail. Elaine walked her to the door. When she came back to the kitchen, Michael and Avery were still there. Neither of them spoke. Elaine poured herself a glass of water and sat down. You can let yourselves out, she said. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was filed. Elaine received a stamped copy in the mail, along with a short cover letter from Marian Neely confirming that the will had been recorded with the probate court and that the trust documents had been submitted to the designated financial institution. Elaine read the letter once, filed it in a labeled accordion folder, and moved on to the next task. She drafted a notarized letter revoking Avery and Michael's access to the house. The letter was polite and procedural. It stated that spare keys were no longer valid as of a specific date and that a locksmith appointment had been scheduled for the following Monday. She mailed copies to both of them via certified mail and kept the receipts in her documentation file. On Monday morning, a locksmith arrived and changed the deadbolt on the front door and the lock on the side entrance by the garage. Elaine paid in cash and kept the receipt. That same afternoon, she installed a small motion sensor camera above the garage light. She mounted it herself using a stepladder and a drill she'd found in Carl's old toolbox, the one Avery hadn't managed to sell. The following Saturday, Michael came by to pick up a few boxes of things he said he actually wanted. Elaine had already sorted through the basement and packed up his childhood books, a few framed photos, and some camping gear Carl had bought him years ago. Michael carried the boxes to his truck without saying much. He glanced once at the shelf in the spare room where the urn used to sit. A brass vase now stood there, cheap, decorative, bought at a thrift store for $6. Michael looked at it and said nothing. When he asked about the scholarship fund, Elaine said, "It will help a kid who reminds me of him." Michael nodded and looked at the floor. He left without asking for the new keys. Avery texted once. The message was short, "Can we talk?" Elaine replied, "We have counsel." A second message arrived an hour later, longer this time, full of phrases like misunderstanding and under stress, and thought it was empty. Elaine read it once and deleted it. She didn't respond. She didn't send the photo of the funeral home label she'd photographed before putting the urn in the safe deposit box. She didn't need to argue. The paper had already been spoken. At the bank, Elaine met with an officer to move a certificate of deposit into the new trust account. The officer, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a name tag that said Linda, asked if Elaine wanted to list the parents as secondary contacts. Elaine said no. Linda made a note and printed the updated account summary. Elaine signed where indicated and took her copy. On the way out, she stopped at the safe deposit box room and checked that the urn was still secure. It was. She closed the metal door, turned the key, and left. At home, Elaine went through the house one more time. She moved methodically, drawer by drawer, closet by closet, cataloging the things that still mattered. Carl's wristwatch, the one he'd worn to their daughter's college graduation in 1998. The chess set they used to play with on Sunday afternoons, one black pawn missing since 2011. 3 letters he'd written to her during a brief separation early in their marriage, kept in a shoebox in the back of the linen closet. She gathered these items and placed them in a small fireproof box she'd ordered online. Along with them, she added a copy of the new will, a printed summary of the trust, and a sealed letter she'd written by hand, addressed to her grandson Daniel, to be opened on his 21st birthday. In the letter, she explained, in plain and factual language, what had happened and why she had made the decisions she had. She did not editorialize. She simply told the truth. She labeled the outside of the box in block letters, for Daniel, age 21, then she slid the box behind a row of cookbooks on the top shelf in the kitchen, books no one ever borrowed, books that had been there for decades. The house returned to its old size. The rooms sounded the way they used to, floorboards creaking in predictable places, the hum of the refrigerator at night, the soft ticking of the wall clock Carl had hung in the hallway 30 years ago. Some weekends, Elaine drove to the cemetery where Carl's marker sat, a flat granite stone with his name, his dates, and a single line. He built things that lasted. She would sit in the car with a thermos of coffee and read a chapter of the book he'd never finished, a biography of an engineer who designed suspension bridges in the early 20th century. She didn't talk to the stone. She didn't bring flowers. She just sat and read and let the time pass. By December, winter arrived early. The first snow fell on a Tuesday afternoon, soft, quiet flakes that clung to the hedges and blurred the edges of the driveway. Elaine brought in the geraniums from the porch and set them on the windowsill in the kitchen. She put the kettle on at 4 o'clock, the hour Carl used to call from the garage and ask if she needed anything from the store. Out of habit, she still whispered milk to the empty room. The scholarship fund sent a form letter in mid-December confirming its establishment and providing the tax identification number for donor records. Elaine filed it in the fireproof box. She updated her password list and tucked it behind the will. She held no speeches for family. She did not explain herself twice. Some Thursday evenings, she pulled Carl's old gray cardigan from the closet and sat by the window with the lights off, the streetlight outside making a pale square on the hardwood floor. She didn't make a ritual of it. She didn't speak out loud. She just sat long enough to remember the scratch on the urn lid, the one he used to tease her about, the one she'd tried to fix with clear nail polish years ago and only made worse. She pictured his hands, broad and careful, the way he always checked the front door twice before bed, turning the knob gently to make sure it had latched. The urn was safe now, locked in a metal box in a building downtown where sunlight never touched it. On most days, that knowledge was enough. Elaine never raised her voice. She never called anyone a thief. She kept the urn, the proof, and her decisions. The will changed the temperature of the house without a slammed door. The scholarship turned anger into something practical, something Carl would have approved of: quiet help, no ceremony, no plaque with his name in bronze. In the end, the most satisfying sound had been the soft metallic click of the notary stamp closing on the final page and the whisper of the folder sliding into the fireproof box. Some people needed confrontation. Elaine needed documentation. On most mornings, she wrote a single line in a small spiral notebook she kept on the counter: the date, the temperature, what she made for breakfast. It was a way to mark time without asking anything from it. When the kettle clicked off, the kitchen returned to its steady hum, the refrigerator, the clock, the radiator ticking as it warmed. That was where she lived now. Steady. Labeled. Hers. The house was quieter than it had been in months. Ruth Delgado, the neighbor who had witnessed the will signing, still waved from her driveway when she saw Elaine checking the mail. Once, she crossed the street and asked if Elaine needed anything from the grocery store. Elaine thanked her and said she was fine. Ruth nodded and said, "Ring if you do." That was the extent of it. No questions. No gossip. Just the quiet solidarity of someone who understood that some things didn't need to be explained. Michael called once in January. Elaine let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. "Mom, can we talk?" "I think we need to clear the air." Elaine deleted it. She didn't block his number. She simply chose not to answer. There was nothing left to clear. The air was already clean, documented, notarized, and filed. If he wanted clarity, he could read the will. If he wanted understanding, he could ask himself why he'd never questioned where his mother's belongings were going. By February, a year after the decluttering had started, Elaine had settled into a routine that felt like her own. She woke at 6:30, made oatmeal with cinnamon, and drank her tea by the window. She read the newspaper front to back, circling articles about infrastructure projects and civil engineering, things Carl would have read. She volunteered twice a week at the public library, reshelving books in the reference section and helping patrons use the computers. She attended a quilting group on Wednesday nights, not because she loved quilting, but because the women there didn't ask personal questions and the conversation stayed light. She lived carefully. She lived intentionally. She lived without apology. One evening in early March, exactly a year after she'd seen the eBay listing, Elaine sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and checked her email. There was a message from the scholarship fund administrator. The first recipient had been selected, a 17-year-old girl from a neighboring county who wanted to study structural engineering. The email included a photo, a young woman with dark hair and glasses, standing in front of a model bridge she'd built for a science fair. Elaine read the girl's essay, printed it, and added it to the fireproof box. Then she closed the laptop and looked out the window. The street was empty. The sky was gray. The hedges were bare. It was an ordinary evening. And that, Elaine thought, was exactly right. She never told Michael about the essay. She never sent Avery a copy of the scholarship announcement. She didn't need their acknowledgement. The work was done. The money would flow where it was supposed to. The memory of Carl, his precision, his care, his belief that things should be built to last, would live on in someone else's education. That was justice. Not loud. Not public. Just true. The urn remained in the safe deposit box. Elaine visited it once every few months, opening the small metal drawer and looking at the brass canister with its crooked felt pad and faint water ring. She never took it out. She never brought it home. It was safer there, untouched by carelessness or greed. When she died, years from now, she hoped the executor would know what to do. The instructions were in the will. The urn would go to Daniel, along with the letter explaining why it had been kept away and why some decisions couldn't be undone with apologies. In the meantime, Elaine lived. She kept lists. She labeled her folders. She checked the locks at night, turning the knob twice, the way Carl used to. She planted tomatoes in the spring and pulled them up in the fall. She kept the house clean but not perfect. She let dust settle on surfaces that didn't matter. She let go of things that couldn't be controlled. But the things that could be, documents, accounts, keys, decisions, those she held with both hands. On the anniversary of Carl's death, Elaine drove to the cemetery and sat in her car with the engine off. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat with a thermos of coffee and watched the light change over the rows of stones. After an hour, she started the car and drove home. She made dinner, grilled chicken, steamed broccoli, and a baked potato. She ate slowly, savoring the silence. Then she washed the dishes, dried them, and put them away. She locked the door. She turned off the lights. She climbed the stairs to bed. And in the morning, she woke up and wrote in her notebook, March 15. 42 degrees. Oatmeal. Clear sky. She set the pen down. She finished her tea. The day began, steady and hers. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.